So I'd like to call the March 7th meeting of the Board of Education to order. You have in front of you the agenda. If you could all review that. There are a couple modifications that we'd like to make to tonight's agenda. The first being moving up the action item on the All Sports Booster donation to after the Dunning Stadium turf replacement presentation. And then Dr. Letzi has another.
Yep, and the second change, and it's on your revised agenda that you have in front of you,
Okay.
Was to add a name to the consent agenda, number 8, Erica Lemke.
Okay.
And you'll see that that's on the revised agenda that you have in front of you.
So if you have a second, Hazel, motion to approve the agenda. May I have a second? Sangita? All those in favor? Okay, so the revised agenda is passed. The next thing is to approve the minutes of our February 22nd meeting. You'll have those in front of you. When you've taken a look, could I have a motion to approve those minutes? Penny? Second? Hazel? All those in favor? Oh, any abstentions? Okay. All right, moving on to comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes are allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Do I have anyone who'd like to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to reports and recognition. The first item on the agenda is the Dunning Stadium turf replacement presentation by Jay Egan.
Yeah, I'll take a brief moment to introduce Jay's presentation tonight as Chip and Jay get the laptop turned on for us. But you may have seen that Mr. Egan's been going to the town boards, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and ultimately the Town Council to discuss the renovations to the Dunning Field. So he and I spoke a bit and agreed that it'd be a good idea also to come to the Board of Education to share with you the plans and some of that discussion and sort of how this has evolved, and to show you a little bit about of the materials that we're talking about. Jay is talking about using on Dunning Field. So I think we have a little show and tell as well.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Thanks for inviting me to share this information about the field renovations. I think that Gary Cass advised me that I should bring manipulatives, and if I was going to, it was going to be an effective lesson, that would be a good way to initiate everyone's interest. So, I know what a terrific educator he is, and so I figured I would take that advice. So I did bring some manipulatives. He's going to pass them down for me as I go through my 60-page presentation here for you this evening. Jill, I took your advice. I don't want to ever make things too short, make sure that I fully explain things, so I'm going to plan to do that.
I love those long presentations.
We have snacks to keep us going.
Actually, you may need them this evening. You may need them. If Mr. Cass can just begin we can just pass those manipulatives around, I'll begin my presentation. So I thought that I would just do a brief explanation of the All Sport Booster Club and the Ram Spirit Fund, because these are some terms that you may have heard people in town talking about, and you may have heard the Ram Spirit Fund discussed in context of this particular project. So I think very simply, the All Sport Booster Club mission is basically to enrich from an operational perspective the budget for high school athletics, and you see before you tonight you'll have a donation for the supplementary winter coaching positions, which it certainly is enhancing that operational budget by providing additional coaches. Ram Spirit Fund, what our thoughts are behind that is to differentiate the enrichment of the capital budget and athletic facilities for not only for high school athletics, but really for athletics for facilities for the entire town. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were clear on what those two organizations, or one organization with two different groups, is trying to accomplish. So Dunning Field, it's just a little quick history. It was first built in 1997. When it was originally built, one of the promises that the people who raised the money and managed the project, one of the promises they made to the town that it would always remain cost neutral to the town. So with the exception of the maintenance, the regular maintenance that's done up till 2016, that has been true. That there's never been any capital expenditures, small repairs, anything that's done in Dunning Field is done through revenues that are produced from renting that facility. So in 2005, the present surface that we have in Dunning now was installed. At that time, we're told that there was a 10-year life expectancy. So we're in the 11th year of the surface in Dunning. Last year, as a result of consulting with some landscape architects and having them look at our field, we learned that there are some signs of serious degradation to the fiber, which you can see if you look at the field. You can see that the white lines are not as crisp and white as they used to because the fibers are releasing from the backing. And you can see it appears to be more of the rubber that you can, it's more of a visual of the rubber when you look down at the field. Additionally, those fields are 5-yard sort of rolls of carpet. And they're all, in this case, our field was glued together. Last October, the week before we hosted the FCAC girls semifinal field hockey game, we had 2 men in the stadium for 8 hours, and they repaired 100 seam failures. So the surface is at the end of its life expectancy, and what we're trying to do is do our due diligence with respect to what kind of surface we should replace, what the surface should be when we replace it. And we're trying to get out ahead of this because the last thing we want to have happen is the surface not to be safe and us not to be able to use it for either a fall or a spring season. So it puts us in a situation where really the only way the field can be replaced, it's about a 10-week, takes about 10 weeks to take out an old field and put it in a new field, just the field itself. So that only can be done in the summer. And so if we don't do it this summer because of any extenuating circumstance, including fundraising, then we would be in a position where it would be a necessity next summer, or I think we would really be risking the surface not being the type of surface that we want it to be with respect to safety. So in thinking about replacing that surface, there's many aspects that I think we have to that we think that we have to consider, and we're looking at many of these options, and one of them that is here tonight was just been passed around. One of the combinations I'll explain as I go through. But there has been recently a lot of negative publicity about the crumb rubber infill. So that's the conventional infill that's in all of these fields. That's in our field now. That's in both of our fields. That's in basically every field that our kids play on in Fairfield County, and most fields across the country are this crumb rubber infill. There are some options that are starting to become a little bit more popular. One of them, people talk about an organic infill. And there was a letter written, one of our citizens wrote a letter to the advertiser, and she, I believe, is affiliated with Greens Farms Academy, and she spoke about the service that they have there being organic and something that we should look at. We have looked at that, and we actually did a site visit last Friday to Greens Farms. John House, Steve Benko, and myself. They don't play football there. The shock absorbency of that surface is not. I don't believe, according to the people we spoke to, that they would play football on it. They've had some problems with it. I think where they are right now, they're in a good place right now as far as the playability of that surface. But the reason I'm bringing this point forward, I'm going to talk about a little further as I go along, is there's a lot of unknowns about these new options, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing as we're working through this process. And it's not just as simple as let's pick an organic infill, and why would we go away from organic to something else? And there's multifaceted reasons as far as safety is concerned that we're trying to consider. So I had a conversation today. I had a number of conversations with people about this today. I talked to this LDD sports consultants down in Maryland. They've consulted for Daniel Hand. They did their field. They've done consulting at Yale and at Hopkins, along with other places in the state. So I asked him the questions that everyone is asking us about the crumb rubber infill, and what would they, how are they looking at that problem, and what are some potential solutions that they have. So one of the things that he shared with me is that regular soil samples have higher levels of metal than some of this crumb rubber that people are looking at as health hazards, which I had not ever heard before. This is all really based on some anecdotal reports of the increase of lymphoma in soccer goalies by the women's coach at the University of Washington. So that's, I think, put people on a different level of alert with respect to the safety of this crumb rubber. And he mentioned something to me. I'm just sharing this with you as a means of background information. So his question was, and he's an independent person, an independent turf consultant. So you would think that synthetic field installers, people that work with this material day in and day out, and it's their way they make their living, that they would be the first group that would report any negative health effects from handling this crumb rubber, and that has not happened. So I'm not drawing any conclusions from this. This is just information that I got today from some of the research that we're doing, and I'm just really sharing it just to help us understand just how complex this decision is going to be for New Canaan, and how complex this whole issue is. There are a lot of these fields around, needless to say. So Gary also told me that I should make sure to include a vocabulary for everyone, and that I should differentiate the instruction, but I don't think we need to differentiate anything here, right? We're good here? But the vocabulary will be important. So when people talk about turf, and some people may ask you some of these questions that are given your positions. They may be, saying that they've heard about some of this information about this turf. So they're going to talk about an ambient rubber, and that's the surface. That's the infill that we have in the surface that we have in Dunning Stadium and on a water tower turf. And so this is where they grind the tires up at room temperature, and I guess what I'm told is that the pieces of the tire are more jagged and they tend to move around and float around, and so that's why your kids, when they come home with their shoes full of the rubber from the fields, that's the reason for it. So in this process, if this rubber is ground up at room temperature, it also doesn't remove any of the impurities. There are higher level of impurities with ambient rubber than there are with this cryogenic rubber, which is the same process happens, except it's done when it's frozen. So these pieces of the tires are more uniformed in size, and they tend to be able to stay together, and they don't move around as much. So as we're talking about alternate infills, these are all different types of alternate infills that are on the market, and they're all basically trying to replicate the properties of the crumb rubber, and they're all synthetic. So they don't have any known negative health effects. And the only thing that we can say about this TP and this EDM is that they are about twice as expensive as the other infill products. They are almost as resilient. The one is quite resilient. The TPE is quite resilient, and the other is not quite as resilient. I mentioned already organic infill. So what it really is, it's coconut fibers and coconut peat that they use in place of the crumb rubber to create some kind of cushioning on the surface. And what I passed around, you can see that one piece of the carpet, it's basically shag carpet, and they fill it up with the infill. So that's really what these fields are all about. One product that we've looked at, which we think has some promise, is extruded cork. And that would be, I have a diagram that I'll show you how we would use that in our surface. So it would be, instead of having the crumb rubber at the top of the infill, we would have the extruded cork, which is obviously not going to have any of the characteristics of the rubber. Another important term, really important term, is Gmax, and that measures the resiliency of these surfaces. And all fields should be Gmaxed yearly. We Gmax our field yearly, and there's a certain range between being too soft and being too hard. And so that's a number that everybody with artificial surfaces always needs to keep in mind, and really you need to do that on a yearly basis. So Dunning has as I mentioned, Dunning's existing field, it's conventional infill, it's 100% ambient rubber. Our field's Gmax is within the allowable range of 120 to 180. So just so you can have a frame of reference, 80 would be a muddy grass field. So how soft is a muddy grass field? Our field Gmax is around 130 or 135, which is still on the low end of the allowable range. So we consider it at this point to be safe and extremely playable. If your field would happen to Gmax, around or under 200, then you wouldn't want to be putting young people out there. So we wouldn't consider it safe based on the resiliency of the surface. So I passed one other study around, and another safety consideration that is important. So the chemical composition of the infill is something that we're considering to be very important. But something else is really infill weight. And that plastic box that I passed around, there are 3 layers on the left side of that box. And that is what we feel is the most desirable situation with respect to safety. And that Myers study that I've passed around correlates the density of that infill with the number of lower leg injuries. And the more dense that infill is, the less number of lower leg injuries, because it provides more stability for the foot when it's planting and when it's cutting. So, I'm giving you this background because I just want you to understand again how complex the whole safety considerations are. And all you basically hear in the news is the safety consideration with respect to the safety of the crumb rubber. But there are other important safety considerations, and there's other data that's going to help us drive our decision. The other thing is pile height. That piece that we sent around is 2.5 inches, and that 2.5 inches would be completely filled up with that infill. And that's how we would get the maximum density that we needed based on making the field most safe. And so here's what it would look like in a cross section. And what I'm trying to describe is the bottom layer being sand, the middle layer being that cryogenic rubber and sand, and the top layer, instead of being crumb rubber, we're looking at a system that has the extruded cork, and the little round tin that I passed around would be the material that would be the top ½ inch of that surface. And the box that I passed around represents that system. So what we've done is we've removed the top layer, the company has removed the top layer of crumb rubber, and they're using this extruded cork, which is it's an organic compound, obviously, and so it has none of the perceived risk or risk of the crumb rubber as far as that's concerned. So, of all the things that we've seen so far, this gives us this satisfies almost all the safety considerations that we can identify, including the density of the infill. Many of these organic systems use a pad underneath the field. They put a pad underneath the field because they can't get enough Gmax. See, that's where the vocabulary comes in handy, Gary. They can't get enough of the Gmax to create enough resiliency on the surface to be able to play multiple sports, which is what we're looking for. It's a little smaller than I thought it was going to be, but just in addition to replacing the field, some long-term planning that we've done around, you could say it's a wish list, or some things we'd like to see happen at Dunning Stadium. Most importantly, I think, would be we'd like to do some work to the press box because of the NCTV and because of all the interest there. It's hard for us to all fit in there with all of the TV equipment, and so the idea is that we would get a larger press box that would give the designated space to NCTV. It's grown to be such an important program, both for athletics and for the school. And the other ideas that we have to do with building an additional concession stand that would be able to service the entire Waveney area, including the tennis courts, the water tower turf fields, the track. And then the entrance that we have now would become, instead of a concession stand and restroom facility, the whole thing would become a restroom facility. So that's basically the idea that exists for these improvements at Dunning. But the most important thing right now is that we look at the replacement of that surface and ensuring that that surface is going to be as safe as we need it to be, and we're not going to get into a situation where we're not going to be able to use it. So the next steps, this is only the first quarter, Gary, so don't get too excited. We're going to finalize research on all these alternate infill options. I had a conversation today with the facilities director at the University of Notre Dame. They have the system that I just described to you is a system that they have there, and he was very gracious with his time. He spent half an hour with me talking to me about all the things that they've been through as far as looking at different systems. And they're all made in Dalton, Georgia, by the way, I learned today, within like 10 miles of each other, all these different companies, that's where they all are. So at one point he said, we thought about going down and buying a factory of our own because of all the different information they were getting from the different companies, but I guess they decided not to. But he was very generous with his time and gave me sort of reinforced a lot of these concepts that I've shared with you tonight. So we're going to continue to do some of that research. I think we're going to, I met this consultant today. He was recommended to me by this gentleman at Notre Dame, so I'm going to speak with him and maybe have him come up and take a look at our facility to make sure that we're on the right track. We want to communicate the information that I've shared with you tonight to the community, in the whole community. So we're drafting a letter that we're going to send out within the next 7 days or so to the entire community. Again, speak to facilities directors, which I've already done, and move forward with a solution and do some fundraising around that. So that's basically where we are. How's that? Good? No overtime. Depends. I can answer some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I think, we appreciate the update and you did a great job of explaining everything for everybody. So why don't I open it up to everybody and have some questions. I see a Penny had her hand up.
So I was just curious about whether or not the American Pediatric Society or AMA or any of the medical groups had come out with any statements or warnings or questions about any of these surfaces.
The only I know that the CDC is studying the crumb rubber now. They're going to study between now. I think they're supposed to come back in November with data on that. There's been a lot of research done, but based on some of these new questions that have come up, particularly in that situation in the state of Washington, I think that there's enough public concern that the government's looking at the crumb rubber piece of it again, we don't think that's really, we're not really looking at that as an option right now, given the sort of the climate about it.
Brennan?
Do you have a sense as to the total cost and how you could fundraise for it?
The total cost well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked me that question. So if we were going to do a crumb rubber replacement of Dunning Stadium, the quote that we have, if we were, it would be $385,000. These alternate, the system that I showed you in the box, it's $500,000. So we had a donation from Jim Dunning last spring to replace the surface of $125,000. After he's a great man, a very generous man as far as athletics is concerned in New Canaan. I mean, after at least a couple of $1 million that he put into originally building the stadium in 1997, he asked us if we needed any help with this, and so we have that. So I think we probably have in the New Canaan, I should mention that as well, we're in partnership with the New Canaan Community Foundation as far as the fundraising is concerned. So that would be the back room, so to speak, for the collection of funds and all that goes with that. So we think we probably have $200,000 that's allocated for the Dunning Field replacement as well. I would like to mention, we're talking about that there was we really pivoted on this because the first project that this Ram Spirit Fund took on was putting new artificial surfaces on the water tower grass field. And we did some fundraising around that. We still plan to go forward with that project. The funds that were raised for that project will not be commingled in any way with these funds for Dunning Stadium. So people donated to build new grass fields and a water tower turf field, that's where those funds will be directed. We look at this Ram Spirit Fund as an organization that will exist going forward. And we have about $5 million worth of planning that we've done for all the athletic facilities on site. I would say that, I hate to say this, but our brothers to the south in Darien have done an excellent job with exactly what I'm describing to you in their community. I know they've raised $4 million. And as you get around this spring and you see various athletic events, you'll see what they've done out in front of the circle and the facilities that they've built. It's really quite impressive. And so that's what we're thinking about.
Sangeeta?
Thanks for all the information, Jay. I've learned a lot about Infill. This new material, the cork, and what you're proposing with this, so this is going to be thicker than what we have currently. Does it last longer? I mean, I know it's more expensive that you coat it compared to just the crumb.
I think that's some of the questions that's when if you say that there's a little bit of indecision, and it's just because it's not that easy to find history behind these fields, and I'm going to be more comfortable when we get a chance to talk to a few more people that already have the service and are using it. It's a tremendous investment for the community, and people are donating funds for playing service, and we want to make sure that we get that right. So it's new, it's very promising. Right now it's at Nebraska, Maryland has a field, Notre Dame, spoke to them today, they have the field. So it's being used in some pretty high profile places. Notre Dame has had their field for 5 years. They didn't identify any negative issues as far as the playability or the maintenance. And so that's part of the discovery process, I think, that we want to be 100% sure that we can say that it'll last for 11 years the way that this field has, which is beyond, the service we have has lasted beyond its life expectancy. And I would say that John Howe and his crew have done a really nice job keeping that field in good shape.
And just a question about the cork itself. So I'm assuming that cork, I haven't heard anything bad about cork, so I'm thinking that this is a nice inert, not going to have the health issues that you kind of associate with the crumb. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And also just a question, because I know with the turf fields and the kids playing on it and having all that black stuff come home, does that same kind of thing happen with this cork? It will still kind of bounce around and get in the cars and
I
everything?
think it'll
or not
bounce
that
around.
can
It
do
might get into cars. It'll be a little lighter.
Okay. And do you need to replace it then when it, like, you know, when you
I
have so
think,
many
I
kids
think
playing?
periodically, just as we do with the crumb rubber, for 2 or 3 years, we top dress the field, so you put the rubber on and even it out. That ensures that when you do the GMAX test, they actually drop an object and they measure the rebound effect of an object, and that's how you do it 3 or 4 times, and that's how you get your GMAX. That's the way to keep a field having that resiliency. So yes, I think there's some ongoing maintenance. The one thing that concerns us about some of the organic infill is that, one thing, it has to be watered, which is, has to be kept moist, which is a concern. And there's about a $10,000 a year maintenance cost for that. So over the life of those fields, it's about $100,000 worth of maintenance, which is, again, something that we discovered as we went through the process, and that's pretty significant.
Thank you.
Penny?
Are there any any systems that combine the organic top with the more synthetic under layers? I mean, it's in a sense that's what the cork is. So that I have to
Yeah.
say that didn't look too organic. But, but I take your word for it, it's cork. I just hadn't seen. I hadn't seen
you'd have
green-
to, I'd have to
hadn't
take
seen
whoever gave it
green
to me as
cork.
word for it. I didn't. I think it's. To my knowledge, the organic infills, the two things that I know about them is they have to have a pad to help with the shock absorption, and the pile on average is about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So the two things that concern me about those fields is the GMAX, the shock absorption, and then that whole idea of the density of the infill. So if it's less dense, that means the foot is going to have more movement on planting and so forth. And so according to that Myers study, which is an independent study that was done on the density of infill correlation of lower leg injuries, those are the concerns I have about the organic field. I don't know of any combination of organics and non-organics.
Sangita?
One last question to just again to remind us just how much this field is utilized. I know we have all these different teams. Could you just kind of give a quick little overview just of how much this field gets used?
So it's and on a spring day. So it's used for high school practice and it's used for youth boys lacrosse practice. It's rented at 7:30 or 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. It's rented on Sunday morning when we don't do any programming. So I guess the time that there's nobody on that field is overnight and during the school day in general. And the rest of the time, there's always somebody on the field. In the fall, we have obviously all the high school sports, and then we have field hockey, youth football on the weekends. We have our soccer games. We've scheduled half of our soccer games in the stadium. So it's easier to say when it's not used. It's not used from December to February.
And Jay, I have just a quick question, and for selfish reasons, really. The heat on the field with the rubber for graduation has been an issue at times where, it gets to be however many degrees warmer because of the sun beating down. With the cork system you're talking about, does that change things as far as the heat reflectivity?
Yeah, that's
and
something I
absorption?
forgot to mention. They do advertise that as reducing up to 25 to 30 degrees the heat because of the color of the infill, and it's not absorbing as much heat or pulling as much heat. So it's used. I know I have a call in at the University of Georgia. They use it there, and I know one of the reasons why they chose it was because of the heat there. So I don't know. That's the claim.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions, and more about the Rams Spirit Fund and some of the financials around it. So I've had questions about, there's multiple fundraising efforts that have been undertaken. There's an effort to maybe do another turf field, and then the Dunning, and it's all kind of part of this Rams Spirit Fund. Could you explain how those funds are being segregated so that the public understands, because I know there's been fundraising specifically for another turf field.
So those funds are, housed at the New Canaan Community Foundation, and they're tracked based on when they were donated, and if they were donated as part of they're in a separate fund. Those funds that were donated for the new turf field are in a separate fund from the Jim Dunning donation, and we had one other additional donation of $25,000 in the fall. So the funds are separate. We've sent out a letter to everyone who has donated so far, explaining what we're going to do, saying that their funds will be used for the purpose for which they donated it. If they want to switch the use of their funds, then they'll notify us and let us know that they're okay with their funds being used in another way. But we will, under no circumstances, commingle those funds as far as the projects are concerned. The reason that we're in this situation of looking at Dunning and replacing the surface is we have a concern about the playability of that field in the short term. And so we don't think we can wait till we raise $2 million to do those other two fields and then come back to the Dunning field. And again, because you have the short window of only the summers, you don't have that much flexibility.
And I know, could you just discuss sort of how other communities, I mean, Darien is one, and if you have other examples of, the more turf fields we build, the greater the maintenance costs we're going to have, and we know that those are built in and they're not small. And we've been, if I understand correctly, we've been told that can't be done through, sort of a long-term planning process through town budgeting funds. It's got to be completely separate. How have other communities paid for this? Because the more we build, the bigger the nut we're going to have to come up with over time.
Well, Darien has the Sunshine, they call it the Sunshine Fund, I believe, and they have identified a long-term capital athletic improvement, have identified long-term capital improvement projects in their fundraising privately for those projects. Your question is how do they ensure that they can be replaced at the end of their life expectancy? I think that a certain percentage of either revenues or a certain percentage of the money that's raised is kept towards the replacement costs. So when you're looking at replacement costs, you're not looking at funding 100% replacement costs. Maybe you're looking at privately, again, funding half the replacement costs. If you had activities, so we feel like if we ever were able to build all these fields, if we had one soccer tournament and one lacrosse tournament, and we've talked to those organizations about this and share some of that revenue and have some of that revenue go into a improvement fund, if you would, that would be one way to get at it. There are some communities that this is where the fields are funded publicly. I know Greenwich is in the process of redoing all their fields, and I know they have public funding for that. I know Wilton is in the process of replacing one of their fields, and I know that they have public funding for theirs. I think it's done in a number of ways. Ridgefield built 2 fields in the last 5 years, replaced their stadium surface, and built another field next to it. Those were privately funded. Okay. So it's a combination of. Okay. But the concern that you raise is an important one. Scott Gress was the first person that ever raised this question. I think it was probably 10 years ago, of the idea of asset versus liability, and so I think that's an important consideration.
Okay, and then I have one other question more about the specifics. When you spoke about the current concession and restroom area at Dunning being converted into, just, if I understood it correctly, just into a restroom facility, and then building a separate concession area that would service all the various fields and courts and things, would that then be open to all those? Would the restroom facilities at Dunning service sort of the tennis and
Yes,
which
exactly.
is, I think that's wonderful, whoever
Yeah.
came up with that, because it's, And then you save the money of the renting the porta johns that are constantly.
Yeah, I mean,
being-
if, on any given day in the spring, we could have a track meet with 300
Yeah.
young people. We could have a tennis match. We can have 2 practices, or we could actually have lacrosse games, a track meet because of the way we're organized. So there could be 650 or 700, high school athletes there at a time.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the weekends, we think it has great promise, to be this a hub of that for the activity that goes on there. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Along
Thank
those
you.
lines, I know you were saying that it was maybe the upgraded version of this, the 500K for just the field. How much would it be to do that press box to get, the NCTV, their space and the concessions? What kind of overall project costs are we looking at?
I'm not going to guess at those numbers because I've seen them and I don't remember them, but I'll send them to Brian and Brian can distribute them. I don't remember exactly. We've had someone give us ballpark numbers on that so we could talk about it, and I don't remember, so I'm not going to guess.
Okay.
I'll send you
Fair
that
enough.
information.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Okay. All right, moving on. So we now have we're going to have the action item. There is an action item on your agenda to move to approve a donation from the All Sports Booster Club in the amount of $36,040.14 for stipends for 11 winter season coaching positions. I guess, could I have a motion and a second, and then we could have discussion? Hazel, could I have, Hazel, Brendan? Any discussion on the donation, Dr. Lutz?
I'll just very quickly mention that this is for 11 coaching positions. Jay is here if there are any questions specifically, but really to say, again, thank you to the All Sports Booster Club and the wonderful generosity that they continue to show. And thank you to Jay for his leadership in our athletics department. His role spans the schools, the town, the fields, the teams, the parents, everything else, and he manages to balance it all quite well. He represents us, the school system, with the All Sports Booster Club, and I think we've worked hard over the last couple of years to establish the procedure of the All Sports Booster Club, making this donation to the school or a donation to the system, and then paying the coaches through the system that way. So it helps us in our recording, and I think hopefully, Jay, it helps you in the All Sports Booster Club as far as management and making those generous donations each time. So you do have a sheet in front of you that breaks down sort of the coaches and the stipends and how we get to $36,040.14. But they do entirely cover the costs of those 11 coaches, which allows us to really provide a level of experience for our students that I think significantly contributes to the excellence of our entire program.
Maria?
Just what sports are the coaches coaching? Do we know, or?
So this winter, we had an assistant, the Board of Education funded 3 basketball coaching positions, and we had an additional coach so that there would be a varsity assistant coach. We had an additional coach for track and field each. We had an assistant gymnastics coach. The Board of Education funds 1, so we had, even though they have about, I think, 12 or 14 girls, they have the spotting issues with that and so forth are important. We fund 2 swimming coaches, swim coaches, so we have a coach who coaches our divers and then a coach that coaches our swimmers, so we have an assistant swimming coach that we fund, that the board, the Booster Club funds. The Booster Club funds 2 hockey coaches, and we funded a 3rd hockey coach for 2 teams. So pretty much every sport that we have in the winter had some assistance. And actually, throughout the year, it breaks down to at least 1 supplemental coach that's Booster Club funded for each program, and sometimes more, given the numbers. It's a good way for us to keep the coach-to-athlete ratio lower. And then also, and if there's a lot of differentiation in the activities, and I think diving's a good example of that. You just can't, everybody just can't be a diving coach, like being a pole vault coach, you know, you want the right person doing that, so when there's a specialization like that, sometimes there's a need for an additional coach as well.
I think that's great, thank you. I know my daughter was high jump, my son pole vault, so I think that's really excellent, thanks.
Thank you.
And just important to note, in receiving these donations and all others, Jay is always reviewing them with Title IX in mind for compliance with boys and girls sports and other things. So we are very careful. I know, Jay, you're very thorough in doing all of that good work for us.
Any other questions? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor of accepting the donation from, as mentioned before, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
All right, so moving on. Thank you, Jay. Moving on, we have a capital projects update with Mr. Willoughby.
Yes, staying in the spirit of capital improvements, we thought it was a good time for Bob to spend a little time with us, and John as well, to give us an update on our progress this year on our capital projects that we have. Bob has created a handout that you have in front of you, and he'll be referring to that, and we'll go through and review that.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'll just run down the list. This is the same list that we reviewed with the Board of Finance some months ago. And we've made some progress since that last report. Structural engineering services, district-wide, we've hired a structural engineer. He's starting to do some review work. We'll have an update on that in the near future. ADA improvements, which were, if you recall, the Silver and Petrocelli review that they did of all of our buildings. They itemized all the ADA improvements that they felt were necessary, and we culled them out of that report, and we're doing them in-house. So it's on the capital list, but it's actually, we pulled it off the capital, and it's an operating expense. Masonry restoration, repoint the brick. That'll come from the structural engineers survey, and we'll probably be looking at doing this work in the summer. It's kind of tough to be tearing the building apart when the students are there. Security. This is the district-wide or the town-wide security budget. We had thumb latches for the high school. We've completed that project. There is still some funding. We tend to add some money to that because we go through the system and then we find out that we missed a door in some remote classroom or whatever. We're back compiling that list now, and we'll be working on that probably over the April break. Window film, we've gotten some estimates from 3 vendors. We're going to review some of those estimates and report back what type of film we want to use and where we actually want to use it. There's approximately $60,000 in that budget. It's really going to handle most of the entryways in the buildings. And then we'll take it from there. It might be another ask of a capital project down the road. East School, HVAC valves, something that's been near and dear to me for a while. We finally completed the project. John was very instrumental in getting that accomplished for us. Curb repair and replacement, that was removed and supports the SACS remediation work. I just identified it on here so you can see there was some money in the capital that we moved over to work on the SACS project. Classroom painting at East, we're about 50% complete. It's real tough to get in there and paint, especially in the elementary schools now. If you've been in an elementary classroom, it's covered wall to wall with displays and what have you. So it's probably something we'll be looking at as soon as school gets out, try to get in and get some of that stuff, the rest of that done. And that's similar in all the buildings. It's listed classroom painting in all the buildings. South, if you've had an opportunity to take a look at the playground, we reworked that hill and replanted and put in a new retaining wall. And I think it really adds a lot to the entire South experience with the new windows and the hill modification. things of that nature, I think we're moving forward very, very well. HVAC valves, again, we've completed them at South, and the classroom painting. West, I don't want to be redundant, but there they are again. The HVAC valves are complete. Gym floor replacement, we took $100,000 out of that project and put that to the SACS remediation. We're now in the midst of doing a survey on the water table at the school. We feel very strongly that the water is what's been causing all the problems in the gym and a lot of our flooring in that building. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough rain this summer to really get a look at what the groundwater level looks like. We've dug a lot of test pits. We've had a hydrogeological engineer doing some surveys, so we'll get back to you on that. We'll tell you where that's at. The walkway on the north side and the front circle at West, there's pictures in the back of here. You can see some of the things that are there. They're a mess, but we had decided to remove that money to work on a SACS remediation, so that'll be something that we'll be looking at down the road.
Well, I believe, Bob, that's in the 17 capital, right?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of the things that are in the capital budget that we keep moving down the road. Hopefully we'll get to them sometime. HVAC valves at SACS, we're at 90%, and we're out of money. So there's probably 10 or 12 classrooms, and we'll have to have a discussion about that and see if we can take care of those in the near future, hopefully. There's a picture of them in the back. They look rather simple, but they're kind of complicated. You have to pull a lot of equipment out, repipe things. The valves themselves are not the issue, it's the labor and the installation time. SACS, still there. We just finished, and again, John was instrumental in that, and he's become my right hand. He's very familiar with these energy projects. We installed a new demand meter, and we were fortunate enough, we changed out the transformer for the building, anticipating the needs for our new project. The electrical engineer was out and said, you have enough gear in the building to handle much more load. We went back to Eversource. Eversource said, yep, we can change the transformer, no charge. And they would do it on regular hours. So the demand meter required us to have a shutdown. So we coordinated on, John at least coordinated them, so that we did them both at the same time. It didn't cost us any extra money, which was a great savings.
And Bob, what does a demand meter do?
Demand will actually, it'll control what the equipment in the building will do. It'll talk to the energy management system. So if it looks like our demand is a ratchet charge. It's a multiplier that dictates what your bill is going to be at the end of the month. If that demand goes real high, your bill goes real high. So the demand meter looks at a bunch of different points and brings motors on at different times. It kind of manages, it helps manage the energy management system. We installed one in a high school last year, and the results have been very satisfactory, and we feel confident that it'll do the same for us at SACS. So moving forward, it looks like we can save some money on our electric bill. More than enough to cover the expense of the demand meter. The retaining wall at the loading dock at SACS, we completed that last spring. Roof ladder replacements, we're looking at this coming spring. The weather has not been too agreeable for us, and also the parking lot striping. And curve repair for the snow removal damage at SACS. We have that everywhere. This is one that made it through the process, was still in the budget. And I work with Tiger on these, Tiger Man with the town, and we'll get it into his sequence of replacing curbs, so we'll get a better bang for the buck. And high school. High school, basically, what we have in there is classroom painting. We've done about 50% of that. Again, we'll try to grab a few more over the April break and possibly in the end of June.
And Bob, when we call it classroom painting, we're not just talking about classrooms, right?
No, it's just a label that we put on painting, period. Most of the corridors in the high school don't require a lot of painting, but we get to the elementary schools. We've done most of the elementary school corridors in the last 2 years. So we'll be into painting classrooms, maybe the gymnasium, some of the cafeterias, things of that nature. painting in general. But what we really asked for was additional money to do the classrooms, because none of them had been touched in many, many years.
Do you want to take us through the pictures that you?
Yeah. At Saks, we spent a lot of money painting frames, door frames, window frames, things of that nature, that were really, really beat up. The corridors had been done a few years back, and they never touched any of those frames, so we were able to go in and clean them up, paint them up. Some of these other photos, the east curb repair and the west curb repair, these are areas, this is where we've come. These things have not been touched in years. They get beat up every winter. Hopefully, we'll keep attacking them. We seem to be piecemealing them a lot. We're gonna have to get to the point where we gotta replace curbing, parking lots. Tiger was able to go back. We did a process 2 years ago where we crack sealed. If you go out and walk around now, you can see the crack seal was a Band-Aid, probably last 3 to 4 years. So all these parking lots are gonna come online down the road in a few years. And there's just, I guess I got a little carried away with the curbs, a lot of curb work. But it's important to me because it's where the children get off the buses in most of the cases, and they step on a broken curb. And the other photo here, the South Hill modification, I just took some shots from either side. I think the gentleman that did the work did a terrific job for us, and they're all handicap accessible now, where there's ramps that the children get in onto the mulch and have an opportunity to play with the other children. Another aside that's not any of this, the buddy benches went in last year, and I think the young man had a conversation with the board. I think they're a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see any of the kids out there on them because it's typically on the weekends and evenings, and I'm not out on the playground at that time. And the last photo was just the HVAC valves. Give you an idea what they look like. Questions?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I want to, for at least for all the board, thank you for all the work you've done. I know it's, your list, it's really great to see these lists and see them, the projects being ticked off the list and things being done and actually, being able to compare, sort of what was on the Silver Petroselli list and where we've come, so, and what we still need to do. Let me open it up. Sangeeta?
Yeah, I remember going to the tour when we looked around at the school and all the problems we had, and I remember looking down this hill that you have for South Hill, and just the teachers couldn't see over the fencing to see what the kids were doing, and, supervision, and just the walkway and stuff, and it looks stunning. I mean, you guys did a wonderful job, and it's so great to see that progression of, there was an issue, and we, got it on the budget, and, were able to complete it. I know there's a few other items you would have liked to have seen completed, but we had to shift a little bit for other priorities, but, it's again, what Deanna was saying, it's so nice to have this, because then we can make sure that they don't get lost in the mix.
Sure.
But again, thank you. And
You're welcome.
I guess, one last question, or I guess I did have one question. The West floor, gym floor replacement. I know that you're looking at the water issue. Can the kids still play on that floor right now? Or
Yes.
Are we doing something?
We're in there all the time making little repairs. We did a fairly extensive repair a year and a half ago. We went in and actually cut out pieces, but you can actually see those are starting to delaminate now. The problem is the moisture that's in the slab itself is what's causing the concrete to deteriorate. So we really wanted to take a good look at it to make sure we were doing all the right things. The water table is it's incredible, and John and I discuss it all the time. The building is on a hill. You think that the water be down the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
It's not. So we brought the experts in. They've done a lot of research. But without the rain last year in the summer when they were here and could really do some work, we have test wells now. They come back periodically. Hopefully, we really haven't had a lot of snow either, so we're not going to have a lot of ground thaw. So I don't know how long this process is going to take, but we just got to keep after it.
We do have money in the FY17 capital budget to do the floor. I think the 125,000
Yes.
was back in. So the money, the town is, at this point, funding that, and actually they're using current funds in order to go through and fund it. But that will be there for, next year as we go forward. So hopefully if we can get some of the answers. But what we're not doing is rushing forward to do it until we know the water issues and know that when we do it once, we'll do it right and solve whatever problems are there. So we're in a position to do it. We're waiting for these studies. And it's funny you say it, Bob, because you're right. Last summer was beautiful. Yeah, we just didn't have rain. So it's hard to identify water source and issues when the sun is shining every day and you don't have the rain.
Any other questions? Penny?
So is it just a problem with the gym floor, or are there water problems with other floors?
The biggest issue
west?
is with the gym floor, with the groundwater. We have some issues in some of the walkways, the ramps going up. We've uncovered that some of the roof drains come off and go into some stone at the side of the building, and they're not piped anywhere. So the water just sits in the ground. So it's looking for a place to come. It comes up through the floor. It's incredible. But we keep testing. We'll come up with a report and be able to make a judgment call as to, some of it is going to be as simple as piping some of those things to a storm drain. But, it sounds simple, but it's not very cost effective. You got to come up with some money. So we want to make sure we're going down the right path before we start rerouting things, changing what happens. So with these test wells, they'll be able to see where the water may be coming from, just by seeing the level of water, the turbidity in the water, to see whether it's kind of ground it's coming through. They've staked out everything. They've been up there numerous times. Like I said, we dug some test holes to see where these pipes really went. You think you dig down and find a pipe that's going out to a storm drain, and it's a dead end.
Other question I had, how did we do on our funds with the projects that have been completed and for the ones that are still in progress? You had said that there was one project where we ran out of money after we did 90%, the HVAC valves at Saks.
Yes.
How do we do on the other ones?
All the other ones, we completed them. Everything is done. When I said it's 100% complete, we changed every valve in the building.
And are we on budget in other?
Yes, we are, yeah.
And do we have any extra funds that could be transferred?
We're right to the wire. We were pretty good with our numbers.
Well, we can't make that transfer.
Right, that we
Yeah,
could
we would
ask.
go- we could ask.
We'd have to go ask to have the funds transferred.
Right. So we can do that and see what the balance looks like.
I just didn't know what the balances
The
were.
balances are small.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of money there.
And just a question.
Sangita?
I know because we're putting all this HVACs because it's supposed to be energy efficient and it's going to help us. And then, you've got this the meter reading and stuff doing. Are we going to be able then to track, are we planning to do that in the future just to see how much efficiency we gain from some of these? Or is that metrics that we could look and see to show that? I know that it makes sense that we should have them, but I don't know if there's any way we can indicate and say, hey, look, we did this and this is what we saved.
We can produce some graphs and come up with some ideas of what we're saving, yes, absolutely. One of the things that we talked about today, John had a gentleman in that can help us with Eversource and possibly get some of the Saks projects. I'm going to hook him up with the engineer for the Saks project and see what he's designed, if it meets all the criteria from Eversource, so we can get back some rebates. And if the design criteria doesn't meet that now, maybe it's time we can get in there and talk to him about what we might be able to modify to get us back some money. So, that just happened today. Yeah. I know Penny's looking at me. Hurry up, hurry up. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Bob.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Okay. All right, moving on to the enrollment and staffing update with Mr. Cass.
Thank you. At your place, I gave you a 15-16 enrollment update, colorful one. It should say March 1st on the bottom. Jay advised me that this presentation would go better when you had a visual handout, so I always listen to Jay. But this is just a quick update about enrollment. Wanted you to be able to see what the numbers look like as of March 1st. So just to point out a couple of things, the elementary enrollment since October 1st till March 1st, we're up 25 students. We're up 5 at Saks Middle School since October 1st, and we're up 3 at the high school for a total of 33 students more than our count on October 1st, just for you to be aware. And the 25 students at the elementary level, the worry is always, will we be pushing class sizes guidelines? And we are very stable on our class size guidelines. You can see that they were spread out over many grades, so that seems fine. The thing that we're monitoring now is looking at the projected enrollments for next year. You see that we have 290 kindergartners. Our numbers right now for kindergarten registrations for next year, we're running lower than that number. We're running at 242 as of March 1st. So it's still early, but we are making our way to up toward the. Our projection is at 317. But looking at the 290 we have this year, we're at 242 right now. So that's the number we continue to monitor and in terms of our enrollment. So that's the update.
Okay, thank you. Brendan?
Just on the 242, where do you track that year to year based on where we are as of this date?
Yeah, we do. We are running pretty close, maybe a little bit low compared to the same time last year. One of the things that is happening shortly is we'll be running parent presentations at the elementary schools for kindergarten. And anyone that hasn't registered and completed all of their materials, that's not included in this number, we usually see an uptick right around those dates. Jill, those dates are coming up in?
The end of April.
End of April. So we know we have a window where those should come up.
Is it true parents must be registered to attend those
Parents
sessions?
need to be completely registered to attend those meetings at each of the 3 elementary schools for kindergarten.
So we have our pre-registered numbers, and then we have people that have been confirmed as proof of residency and their birth certificates. So we're at a place right now where we sent out an email to all the people that have pre-registered last week, reminding them that they need to have all of these appointments in before the end of March. The end of March is when we send out all the invitations to the families to come to kindergarten orientation, and it is an opportunity for the kids to come with their parents, so that usually pushes people that may still be on the cusp of making that decision. Do they come to kindergarten or not? They will often make that decision around that time, or people that haven't registered yet or have kind of missed even the pre-registration process, all of a sudden will call over and say, I need to get my child registered immediately so that they can come to the kindergarten orientation. And I believe South will kick off the week April 20th, and then East and West are the following week, April 26th, somewhere around that time.
Other questions? Anyone? Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is a budget update with Dr. Lutzy.
Yes, we remain in the season of budgets, and I thought that it'd just be a good idea to give a quick update based on our conversation with the town council last week. And before, we have another meeting with the town council next week. Is it the 16th, I believe? I'll double check that. So the good news at the town council meeting was related to insurance. And you may recall earlier we had let the board know, and all the town boards know, that we were asking our consultants to go back and to look at the claims history and to use the 2 months of updated history, since the numbers we had were based upon the budget that was developed and presented in January. So as we get into March, then we ask them to pull the most recent months. And what happens as they do the projections is the older months roll off as new months roll on. And we had the good fortune of having 2 months of significantly improved claims. So where our months might have been running at over $1 million, now the months were running, these 2 months were running more like between $800,000 and $900,000 as we looked at some of the numbers. So that becomes a significant amount of money. So thanks to those a couple of good months, the claims projection for FY17 was revised, and that was, it was lowered downward by $254,000. And again, that's based upon those projected claims. They use, obviously, a rolling average when they create the next year's anticipated claims. And that number will continue to be a moving target until the final number comes at the end of our plan year. The plan year it ends August 30th, but the closer we get to it, the more accurate that number becomes. The other part of the good news, other savings, there are two ways, and I explained this to town council, but hopefully I can do it a little more clearly here. When we renegotiate a contract and we renegotiate the insurance in that contract, there's two ways when that insurance plan is finally decided upon to go through and realize the savings. One is to allow that new plan year to kick in and allow those savings to work their way through the plan, and then you realize it as you get projected claims for the following year, so you do it in real time. Another way is to project the anticipated savings based on the new plan design. So you actually take the savings up front as we go through and do it. So talking with Joe Spurgeon, who you've met, and Steve May, and now that they're more familiar with our plan and they've had some time to dig into some things, they felt comfortable helping us to anticipate what the savings would be based upon the new insurance plan for our teachers, and they estimated that at about $200,000. So that has to do with the co-insurance, and that has to do with some changes in plan design for the teachers in the HDSA, specifically the elimination of the PPO. So the teachers now who are using the PPO plan beginning in next year, at September 1 of 2016, that will no longer be available to them, so they'll all be in the HSA. So those two changes, they're anticipating the savings. So we thought it was better to take it up front, as we're doing this, and maybe it'll be a little more, but maybe it'll be a little less. But they felt like this was a fair estimate of what that savings would be, and now that they have the understanding that they do of our plan. So all told, we were able to reduce, both of those are in the operating budget, because both of that comes from our anticipated claims number. So we're able to reduce that number by the $454,000. And so that, I wanted to mention that so that certainly the board understands it and to give you an opportunity to ask any questions if you have them. The other discussion, and we had lots of sort of specifics around elements of our budget, and you're welcome to ask any questions you like, but I do want to take just a moment to mention the capital. The decision was made to use fund balance from this year to pay for the vast majority of our capital requests for FY17. So, for instance, the capital requests included 4 special education vehicle replacements. So all 4 of those replacements would be funded using fund balance from the FY16 budget. The facilities capital, all but 2 items in facilities capital would be paid for with the fund balance from FY16, and then the other 2 items would be the budget as we look at the FY17. And then but the technology lease, which is a total of $629,035, that, because it's a lease, cannot be front funded, so that will be in the capital budget request next year as well. Some of the things that Bob just mentioned are in the capital request for FY17, which is, although being funded with money from the fund balance of FY16, we will still be doing the work next year, right? Just because they funded this year doesn't mean we have to try to get it done by June 30th. You can exhale, Bob. We have the full year to do it, and even in speaking with Dawn, if it went beyond that, we have an opportunity to carry over capital. They ask for our capital carryover items, and we could identify them. So it's really a funding mechanism more than anything as we go through. But some of the items, just to mention, the curb repair and replacement over at East was funded at the $50,000. The Farm Road parking lot restoration, which we had anticipated at $400,000 after a conversation with Tiger, was removed out of this capital request and actually out of the towns, and that they've agreed that it'll be part of the bonding for the roads that they're going to be doing this year. So that will be a part of that package and will be completed. And then over at West, the north side walkway, the front of the circle, curbing, is also in that capital request for another $50,000. So some of the pictures that you have here, the curbing should be fixed as we go through the year as we have the opportunity to do that. So I thought that was good news too. And then, as I said, we continue on, and we will be meeting with the town council next week to further our conversation.
Are there any questions for Dr. Lutzy on the budget? It's been a lot of. Penny?
Just one comment, which when we went into this budget season, we're not through it yet. We were concerned about the insurance number because this was the year when we could no longer use reserves, and we were going to have to see a huge, relatively speaking, very large increase in the insurance line. And so I thought what was really good about the discussions is that was recognized by the town bodies, and that increase was put in to the budget, and so that going forward next year should just be the standard increase that a typical district would expect with the kind of plan that we have in the insurance line, and so that we didn't know how that was going to go, and I thought that went very well, and they were great discussions with the town bodies so far on that issue. So I just wanted to commend. Having issued warnings before on this subject, I just wanted to say that I appreciated the interest and the dedication with which everybody on the town bodies looked at this issue.
Anyone else? Okay. All right, well, thank you. All right. So we finished the reports and recognition, and we can move on to the consent agenda. You'll see on your agenda a number of items. There's 9 items on the consent agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Sangeeta? Second? Penny? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, moving on to, are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, we will move into announcements and future meetings. Dr. Lutzy.
Sure. Well, first, I just would like to remind you and the public that March is Board of Education Member Appreciation Month. And so I do want to say thank you. We are very lucky in New Canaan to have an outstanding and dedicated board who's focused on students and how we can best serve the entire community. I think the best example of that, or one of the best examples of that, can go back to our discussion around our district goals that we had a few months back, where goal number 1, as you recall, is about improving student achievement and working to identify the ways that we're measuring how students are improving. The board spent in excess of an hour discussing goal number 1 and all the specifics about it, and really very engaged with that entire discussion. The other goals are also important, and we have 4 other goals. But in less than an hour, we talked about the other goals, and we moved on to some of the other things. And I think that really shows how the Board of Education truly is focused on students, on learning, and on the work that goes on in our schools. And sometimes we have presentations about capital and facilities and other pieces, and that's all an important component of it. But what really drives, I think, the board and the mission of the district is about students, the parents, the community, and how best to serve. And so I think we're very fortunate to work for a board that is so focused. The excellence of the school district comes from many, many sources, and I think that certainly the Board of Education is a contributor to that. So in appreciation of your hard work, there is a small little token in front of you that is a gift from us to you, and it's, it's a little snack, as Penny said. So that's for you. I also do want to say that the high school today actually kicked off Safe Driving Month. If you came during the day, you would have seen a car out front in the plaza that had recently been in an accident. They began today with some conversations and different pieces to sort of kick it off. And throughout the month, they'll be doing different programs. They have a speaker coming. They've partnered with the state police, and thanks to Jason Kim with our local police here. Jason's our SRO, and they'll be doing things really focused on highlighting the importance of safe driving in our school. And this is something that PFA did 2 years ago. They sponsored and ran through with great success, and I'm sure this will be just as successful this year as well. So we're appreciative of the PFA for their good work and for everything that's happening in the high school around safe driving, because really that is such an important component of growing up as our students get their licenses and begin to drive for the first time. And we know just how things can happen. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on this with our students. It's something that many of them will do every day. And certainly the temptation to be distracted is probably greater than ever before behind the wheel. So we're really highlighting the need for students to stay calm and focus on their driving. So, at our next meeting, we meet in 2 weeks, and we are working now to develop a report for the visual and performing arts. I know Alan Sneath is working on that with Dr. Carenti, put some things together for us. We will have another budget update, which may be short and sweet again, and we'll be just about rounding third base to home plate at that point in our process, because right after that comes the final town council meeting and the budget vote. And then, of course, the statement of accounts with Dr. Keating. So, there you have it.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn to executive session. May I have a motion in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes 1-206. The subject to be discussed concerns real estate matters. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive session? Sangeeta? Second. Brennan? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay.